In the late 1990s and early 2000s, there was a lot of research, and I guess maybe the foremost person in this category would be Robert Putnam at Harvard. Wrote a wonderful book called Bowling Alone. The argument was that American society had atomized, that people had, whereas in the past they had joined bowling leagues and played softball teams and had all these sorts of communal activities that went on in which they established connections with people in their neighborhood and in their local areas, that those activities had fallen by the wayside with the rise of television. The television had, as we suggested, atomized society. It meant that we all went home and we watched television every night. And these old sorts of ties that we had with other members of our community had broken down. There is a sense in which social media has re-energized those ties. Now, they're not necessarily face-to-face, although you can do that via computer, but they create these virtual ties and these virtual communities. Now, that's an extremely interesting development. Now, I've always thought that Putnam's argument was slightly overstated, that these communal ties have always existed and they're more persistent than he might have said. However, the opportunity to reestablish them in a slightly different form has clearly been taken advantage of. People do have ties with all sorts of members of these virtual communities. Some of them are localized, they're geographically local. Some of them simply are based on interest, common shared interest, whether it's a sports team or a political group or something like that. And you can do these nationally now. It's actually easier to establish connections now than it was in the 1940s or 50s, and it seems to be the case that people do this. How have campaigns done this, or how has it been politicized? Well, it seems to be the case that politics follows society with a couple-year lag. So political organizations have tried to enable these sorts of connections amongst followers. So people who have a heavy interest in Democratic politics or Republican politics. The party organizations and outside interest groups have attempted to establish a framework by which they can connect with other people and which they can disseminate information. So what seems to be the case is that we used to talk about politics in terms of social groups and opinion leaders. This is a strand of research that goes all the way back to scholarship done by people from Columbia University back in the 1930s and 40s about how politics works. And they emphasized opinion leaders operating through these sort of social networks. That scholarship fell by the wayside a little bit in the 60s and 70s and 80s as we talked so much about television and broadcast communication. Well, nowadays, because of social media, we're almost back to the future. We've dusted off some of those theories about social networks and order and updated them. In place of beer leagues or bowling organizations, we talk about Facebook groups, right, or Pinterest groups and things like that, and the sort of communication structure that occurs. But we've essentially taken theories that were developed almost 100 years ago and used them to inform how we think of politics. Now, obviously, the Obama organization, I guess, is the most famous in its use of social media. They basically provided a framework for supporters to reach out and to communicate, to establish more localized, personalized networks. It seems they were very effective in doing that, although I think we may be overstating the actual impact on the vote, and that's something we should probably bear in mind moving forward.